Hello and welcome to a new interactive handicapping seminar that we are going to give a try here. You are currently viewing my screen on my iPad, and I am sitting here with an Apple Pencil and going to be able to mark up this racing form, if you will. We've done some handicapping seminars in the past, gone through some big weekend races, and all of those, however, were over a call line. Where I'm sure it was a little bit harder to kind of, visualize exactly what I'm talking about. I'm very excited about this, new way or new approach to these handicapping seminars. And, with this Apple Pencil, I am going to be able to actually mark up the racing form, as you can see here, maybe in front of us. So let's go through both the Pegasus World Cup turf, as well as the Pegasus World Cup, two very exciting races on a big Saturday card at Gulfstream this weekend. And let's see what we find. I've already kind of looked at both of these races already. I do have some ideas, but I'm also not completely done with the handicapping process. So we'll kind of go through it together here, as a team, if you will. So what I always talked about on previous calls where we've done things like this is, you need to have a set system for how you handicap a race. You need to have, step one, step two, step three. In my mind, at least, that keeps me a little bit more organized and gives me a better, vision of how the race might turn out. And for me, the most important aspect of any race, whether it's a 5-claimer or a grade 1, is the pace dynamics and how they're going to shape the race going forward. That might be a little bit of that, son of a jockey background in me, but this is what most riders do when they sit in the jockey's room and they go to handicap a race they're going to ride. They have to know, okay, what style of running does my horse have, and what style of running do the horses around me have, so they can at least try to visualize a trip that's going to make sense for them in the end. I think you need to do the same thing as a handicapper, because if there's a race with a ton of speed, you probably don't want to bet a speed horse. If there's a race with no speed, you probably want somebody a little bit closer to the pace. So, what I always do, and we will fire up the Apple Pencil now, is I take a look right away at the conditions of the race, right? Okay, so this is a grade 1 on the turf going 1 mile and 3/16. It's always important as well with different tracks that maybe you're not accustomed to, to look at, that race dynamic. That race shape, and say, okay, the break here on this track is, actually all the way towards the top of the stretch, and they have a little bit of a run into the first turn here. You might see some route races where the break is right on top of the turn, and post position is going to mean a lot more. So that being said, I think you need to look at, this race, and even though some horses might have outside posts, recognize that they have a long run into the first turn and some time to be able to get over. So there's a main contender on the outside who drew, poorly, Magic Wand, probably the most accomplished runner in this field. Even though she is breaking from post 12, she has some time to get over. Ryan Moore has some options, but, step number 1 in the handicapping process, look at the conditions of the race up here. And then, step number 2, go through each horse and begin to visualize what style of running they might have. So, we begin with the first horse here on the rail, Zulu Alpha. Something that I've found very, very helpful, that the racing form has recently kind of added, is these time form US pace figures, especially the early pace figure. And they actually are able to give you, a numerical value of that horse's early speed, right? So Zulu Alpha, typically in the past, I would look at, just the body of his races, and okay, he typically likes to come from behind or come from off the pace early on. Now they give it a numerical value. You hear this 41. That's on the much slower side. So I would consider Zulu Alpha a closer, which I usually designate in my racing form as, CL. Then I'll move on to the next horse. I won't even evaluate yet their past performances and what they've done. First, I need to establish the pace of the race. So, okay, now I'll look at Arklow. Arklow, as we well know, is another one, does not have a lot of early speed, likes to come from off the pace. Lately, these were some slower pace races here, but, it was a little bit closer in the Turf Classic that he did win. That was a very oddly run race. I still consider him more of a closer or maybe a mid-pack type of horse. One thing to remember with Arklow as well is that he can be very fractious in the gait. Typically doesn't break super well, and at times has even had problems here. He lost the rider with Florent Geroux. I sometimes would then mark something like gait, a horse that doesn't break well. Moving on to Without Parole. Now, Without Parole is a little bit trickier because, a lot of his races were overseas in England. We only have one race in North America for us to go off of. So this time form number here of 84 for Without Parole, that might not be so truly accurate to, how his running style is. He does like to, track the leader, kind of stay close to the pace if you watch some of his, his European races. But the Breeders' Cup Mile was a very fastly run race. And one that, that 84 might be a little bit inflated. That being said, I would still consider him somewhat of a stalker in here, a horse with a little bit of tactical speed. Moving on to Sadler's Joy, he is as true of a definition of a dead closer as it gets. Channel Cat as well, he's varied it up. Channel Cat, I remember Luis Saez was able to steal the Bowling Green with him in the summer of last year, and stayed a little bit closer to the pace in the Sword Dancer and the Turf Classic. He doesn't have a very fast time form early number, though I would say he's one that you'll see running in the middle of the pack. MP is how I designate that. Instilled Regard might be the first horse that we've looked at here with some actual speed and some actual ability to maybe put himself up in the race. I would consider him a stalker or a potential speed horse in here. And you're beginning to see a race shape as well as you go through each horse. Admission Office, another dead closer, very slow early on. Henley's Joy, a horse that typically, doesn't show a ton of speed, sits mid-pack or closes. Next Shares, one that has a propensity at times to drop way out of it. Last time was a little bit closer when he won the Seabiscuit, one that probably runs in the middle of the pack. Mo Forza is one as well that is one, much more like Instilled Regard, has some tactical speed, and he is on one impressive win streak. I know he was farther back in the Mathis Brothers Mile, but that was after a 22 1/4 and a 46 1/2. I would consider him a stalker or one that could show some speed in this race today. Sacred Life, probably a horse that you would see in the middle of the pack. And then Magic Wand is one that, she does have some tactical speed that she can show. She has varied up her style throughout her career, a tremendous international campaign that she's been on, and really an iron horse, if you will, in terms of this travel. She doesn't often get the wins, but she by far has the classiest form lines of anybody in here. I would say she's more of a stalker or mid-pack division type of horse. You have an also eligible Tusk, who, if he did get into the race, would be the speed, the true speed. And usually I will designate that as SP with a circle. But that being said, I highly doubt Tusk is going to get in here. If he does, though, he could be winging out on the front end. So now you kind of review all the markings of the pace that you've made, and you come to a conclusion that, there's not a ton of speed in here. There's really not any one true, leader type, a horse that always goes to the lead. It's kind of hard to figure out exactly who will end up on the front end in here. It could be possibly, Instilled Regard is one that could maybe end up on the front end. Another one would potentially be Mo Forza. Joel Rosario, to me, at times can be a guy who's not afraid to take the initiative and take command of a race. I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually Mo Forza out in front, maybe with Instilled Regard, kind of stalking, and maybe a horse like Without Parole or even Magic Wand kind of sitting right off that pace. I'd be inclined to take a horse that's a little bit closer to the pace in this race, just because, you know, I'm having a hard time seeing where a horse like, you know, like a Sadler's Joy or an Arklow, you know, or even a Zulu Alpha really gets that strong pace that they get to close into. You know, I don't know. It's a hard race shape to kind of vision. And now we can kind of, you know, once we have this knowledge in our head, okay, we probably want horses that are a little bit closer to the pace. You know, now we can get into each horse in their form and actually kind of determine, you know, who we might want in here. You know, we'll start right back at the top with Zulu Alpha. You know, he actually really did not run that poorly in the Breeders' Cup Turf. If we just use our little eraser here to clear up some things. You know, you look at, he only got beat a length and 3/4 in the Breeders' Cup Turf. You know, obviously a very talented field, bricks and mortar, Anthony Van Dyke. You know, surprised to see a horse like United didn't show up for this race. And, you know, there's another thing to warrant with him. He's very good at Gulfstream Park. He's got 2 wins. You know, he was able to win both the McDermott and the McKnight last year down here and produced some pretty nice speed figures when he did so. You know, Mike Maker's always very dangerous, especially in South Florida in these turf type of races. You know, if he can be a little bit closer to the pace than he normally is, you know, he's a horse that maybe you have to consider in here. You know, I do wonder, though, when you talk about the true class test, you know, is he quite as good as maybe some of his other rivals in here? I would say that he's a horse that, you know, we'll change the color of our pen here one more time, that I would use as like a B or a C in here. You know, a horse that I don't think is primarily a win candidate, but one that I would probably use underneath. You know, Arklow, I think Arklow's going to have to show it to me. I know he's been pretty consistent over his career and usually does show up. You know, he's never run at Gulfstream Park. Again, that fractiousness in the gait, you know, in the Breeders' Cup Turf was a little bit concerning to me. And, you know, typically those gait issues don't tend to get better as horses get older. You know, he's usually a horse that gets bet as well. You know, I'm going to take a stand against Arklow, you know, here in this spot. I'm not going to use him in any of my plays. He's probably going to be an X for me. Without Parole is a very interesting horse, because I think you have to realize, and what some people might not have realized, you know, when he ran in the Breeders' Cup Mile, is that once upon a time, this horse was the top 3-year-old in all of Europe over a mile. You know, anybody who can win the St. James's Palace is a very talented, very classy individual. I don't know what happened here, you know, in the second half of his European form, if you will, where it just seems he completely lost his way. You know, he was given some time, obviously May to November. He was transferred to the barn of Chad Brown. And he ran a pretty good race in that Breeders' Cup Mile. I know he did get a little bit of a pace set up in there, you know, but he was one that was running on at the end. And now he's had a lot more time with Chad as well. And typically with Chad, you know, you want to see a steady stream of works that are kind of leading into a spot. He likes to give his horses lots of time between races. And it's all really about looking at that work tab with him. And, you know, he'll put sharp works into a horse much further out from a race than other guys might. You know, you look here, December 21st, a 47-2 bullet on the turf at Palm Meadows. You know, a couple easier works after that, but then, you know, just before this race, another sharp work in a minute. You know, factor in the pace scenario, you know, how there might not be so much speed in here, and he could be a little bit handier. He does get his regular rider as well from Europe, and Frankie Dettori coming over to ride him this day. Look, if this horse can recapture some of this old form, you know, back in here, you know, from the middle of 2018, this is a very dangerous horse. You know, and this will be a horse that I prominently use in my plays. He's an A for me without Parole. Going on to Sadler's Joy. Look, I've been a big fan of Sadler's Joy, you know, for a long time. And he's one that always tends to kind of need some pace to run into. He got that pace in the Red Smith. You know, he's also can, you know, be a little bit of a bridesmaid at times. You know, he went through a long stretch in here of, you know, not really getting it done, you know, coming close, but not really getting it done. He's a horse that I probably would not use in multis. I don't like him on the win end, but I do like him, you know, underneath potentially if you're playing like tries and supers. He'd probably be a C for me. Channel Cat is a horse who kind of got hot in the middle of last summer, but I really don't think he quite has the class of some of the other ones in here. You know, he's an X for me. Instilled Regard is one I've gone back and forth on, and I wonder if I'm just trying to use him because I don't think there's a ton of speed in here. You know, he doesn't have a ton of back class on the grass. You know, I know he did beat a few of the other horses that are in here in Admission Office, you know, and Channel Cat, but I just don't know if any of these horses are quite good enough, you know, to really contend. You know, I still have to respect him though, in case they crawl and he's sitting in a dream kind of spot under IRAD. He's probably a B or a C for me. You know, Admission Office, I know was coming out of that Instilled Regard race. You know, he does pick up Flavian Pratt, which is an interesting, you know, rider assignment here for me. And he did come from a little bit further off that pace that kind of held together in the Fort Lauderdale. You know, I'd probably have him as the C underneath, but I don't know if you could really use him in multis. If you want to use him in multis, he will be a big price. You know, so if you're price hunting, maybe that's a horse that you want to throw in there. Henley's Joy, I just don't think is good enough at the end of the day. He's going to be an X. Next Shares is one of the hardest horses to figure out, it seems. He's usually very hot or very cold. You know, he's got some awful performances. He's got some pretty good ones. He does have a win over the Gulfstream Park surface, but he did run in this race last year, and the class kind of showed once again that, you know, he doesn't really belong with these. I have a hard time using him. He's an X. Mo Forza is a horse that, since he broke his maiden, has really just taken off. He's strung together 4 straight wins. He does it with this nice kind of stalking the pace style. You know, he's been ridden with a lot of confidence. Seems like some Peter Miller horses, when they finally figured out, they can get really, really hot. I don't want to get beat by this horse. The extra distance is a little bit of a concern, but given the gentle pace, you know, that we could be looking at, you know, I am not going to lose to Joel Rosario on the front end for Peter Miller. He's going to be an A for me as well. Sacred Life, Chad Brown trainee that went out to California and got beat by Next Shares. You know, I feel like he might just be a slight cut below some of the other Chad Brown runners that you have in this field. You know, look, it is Chad Brown though. His post is difficult though, you know, and he doesn't necessarily have the forward speed to get a real position. I think he's probably going to end up losing some ground, you know, going forward into the first turn there. You know, one that at the very best could be a C, more likely that I toss him. And then Magic Wand on the outside, you know, you look at this form, you know, it's amazing where this filly has traveled to and in the time span she did. You know, last year alone, look, she started in Dubai. She traveled to the United States, you know, ran at Belmont, went over to Royal Ascot, ran in the Wolferton, then went over to Ireland and ran at the Curragh, back to Ascot, now to Arlington Park, back to Ireland. Then she went down all the way to Australia, and she ran in 3 different grade 1s in a span of about, 14 days there. She ran in the Cox Plate, the Melbourne Cup, and the McKinnon, won the McKinnon, the last of those 3. And then was beat the dirtiest of noses on Hong Kong Championships Day in the 1.25 mile Hong Kong Cup. She has a massive class edge on this field, and I think you have to respect her and use her as an A. Look, there is one thing that, you know, I've even pointed out to people at times over the past couple of years. Aiden O'Brien's having a rough go in America. He's obviously one of the best trainers in the world, but he is 0 for 28. He did not win a race in North America last year, and I think that even extends back to the middle of 2018. So look, combine that with that this is a filly that oftentimes runs second rather than she does win. She's worth trying to beat in here, but you're going to feel real silly if she smashes everybody, you know, because she does have a massive class edge on this field. So, you know, in conclusion, the main players for me are going to be Magic Wand, Mo Forza, I'm also going to use a little bit of Instilled Regard, maybe a little bit of Admission Office underneath. Sadler's Joy could always jump up for a piece. Zulu Alpha warrants some respect. And, my main A's, though, are going to be Without Parole, Mo, Forza, and Magic Wand. So if you're handicapping the Pegasus Turf, that's kind of my process. That's how I go through it. Now we'll move on to the dirt race. Now the $3 million Pegasus World Cup Invitational. And again, we'll start right at the top. 1 1/8 at Gulfstream Park. Very short run into that first turn. Post position here is going to matter a lot more than it would in the turf race that we just handicapped. And so let's go through the field. Pace figure wise, there is a big scratch in here. Just this morning, Spun to Run was announced that he is coming out, so we will scratch him out of our program right there. That also takes a big injection of speed out of this race. So this was originally a race that I thought, okay, it's going to get pretty hot up front. Let's go through it without Spun to Run, though, and see, okay, where are we really at here? True Timber 114, that, does indicate that he has some good tactical speed, especially these two races here, sitting just off of 45 half. He's a stalker who could show some speed. And from the rail, he's, Joe Bravo is probably going to want to establish his position going forward and hold his spot. I wouldn't be surprised if True Timber showed some speed. Tax, he typically has stalked the pace in some of these 3-year-old races he's running, but those were much slower run affairs than you typically see. And time form only gives him a 96. He was off the pace in a hotly run discovery as well, behind a very talented horse of Shug McGay. He's called Performer. Tax is a horse I like in here, but I don't think he's going to be that close to the pace. I think he's probably going to be sitting mid-pack. As you do notice, Irad Ortiz has been riding him. His brother Jose jumps on here today. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes. And, sometimes we can rack our heads with jockey assignments or jockey, musical chairs, if you will. I don't really know how much you should put into that in this spot here. Diamond Dupes is a sprinter that is stretching out. He gets a 108. He's probably another one who could stalk or show some speed. Seeking the Soul is a dead closer. 80, as we saw, some of those turf marathoners, they had, 30s and 40s, and 80 on the dirt is much more a horse who's coming from off the pace. Whereas the turf, it's a little bit different. So if you're just getting used to these time form US pace figures and you're not too sure, typically the dirt, you expect them to be a little bit higher in the early portion than, obviously on the grass. So, if you're just new to them, kind of compare them to everybody else in the field and develop your race shape from there. Omaha Beach is the big favorite, coming off the win in the Malibu. Obviously was second to Spun to Run in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, but he did not break very alertly that day. And then, before that was stalking the pace in a very fast Santa Anita Sprint Championship. He's a deserved favorite and one that should be showing some speed. I'd be shocked if Mike Smith didn't come out of there, running another one, stalk or show speed. Higher Power is a horse that's, cutting back a little bit. His best races, in my opinion, have been at 1.25 miles. I wouldn't expect him too close to the pace early on. I think he's more of a middle of the pack type of runner. War Story, same kind of deal, a middle of the pack, maybe potentially stalking type of runner. You move on to Mr. Freeze. This is a real speed horse. This is a horse gets a 118 early on, and as you see here, loves to contest the early fractions. I would expect that he's going to be one of the most prominent ones showing speed early on. Mucho Gusto is another horse that, typically shows some good speed. He only gets a 101 here. I wonder if he's quite fast enough. There was a workout that he had on January 16th from the gate, and I actually watched that work, and they really did ask him, to kind of sharpen up, and you wonder sometimes why a guy like Bob Baffert would, work an older horse out of the gate. It's really to kind of, sharpen them up and remind them, of what they have coming, especially off of a layoff like that. You don't want him flat-footed in the gate at all, and I think them working from the gate here indicates that they want him to show some early speed. The very interesting rider assignment is Irad Ortiz, obviously a switch from regular rider Joe Talamo. we'll talk about that in a minute. I don't want to read too deep into it, but I do know it's a topic of conversation. I would expect him to be showing some, stalking or prominent early speed. Tenfold is a dead closer. And then finally on the outside, you have Boat Express, who is a speed horse. He's going, and he has to go from that outside draw. Also factor that in with Mucho Gusto as well. That these outside draws, they're going to have to go forward hard early on to establish a spot. I would expect Irad to come out hustling, Jaramillo to come out hustling. You're probably going to see speed from Mr. Freeze as well. If Spun to Run was in here, now you're talking about 4 or 5 different speed horses that could be contending early on, especially when you have some guys down on the inside. Like Mike Smith is going to have to know, I've got 3-4 speeds to my outside. I'm going to have to hold a spot, or I'm going to have to eat some dirt into the first turn. Even without Spun to Run, I think this has some potential to get hot. If it did have Spun to Run, we're talking about a potential meltdown in here. So very interesting always to see how this is going to play out into the first turn of the Pegasus World Cup, formerly known as the Don, if you will. But let's get into some of the horses that I like in here. True Timber, just a horse that I think has always been a slight cut below some of the other, top dirt, horses in the country. A talented horse, but not one that I will be having on my tickets. And I really don't like that rail draw necessarily. With so many different people going forward early on, he's probably going to have to come from off the pace. Tax is one, that I'm very intrigued by. I think very, very highly of this performer of Shug McGahee's here. And this was a great race in the Discovery. They gapped the rest of the field, as you see, and really kind of threw it down in the stretch. Performer prevailed, but he is a horse that I think could be one of the leading handicap horses in the country this year. I've never really been on Tax. Throughout the Triple Crown series of last year, I never really picked him. I never really was a big fan. I have really enjoyed some of the works that I've seen from him, though, in particular his last 2. I think, some of these Sons of Arch can get better as they get older. He's a gelding as well, also a sign that he could get a little bit better as he gets older. I think he's training with a lot of vigor. And I think, he's going to be able to save ground into the first turn. I think he's going to, obviously Jose Ortiz, his new rider, is going to let all those speed horses go. He could be one sitting in that perfect sweet spot, mid-pack, maybe 6th, 7th, or 8th place. And as some horses are starting to come back to him, really start to swallow up horses and make a strong move. Tax is going to be an A for me, and one that I'm going to circle here. And really a horse that I'm probably going to bet to win and use in multis. And this is my bold opinion of these 2 races, is that Tax is going to run a big race. Danny Gargan doing very well down at Gulfstream Park. Some people will say, okay, well, Irad Ortiz has jumped off this horse. He was actually on Tax the morning of this bullet workout here, and that was a nice work that they went together. Let's talk about Irad and his jockey's decision here, because even before Spun to Run came out, Irad announced that he was going to ride Mucho Gusto. For me, I don't necessarily think this is a move that was made in regards to this one individual race. Oftentimes, we've seen Bob Baffert, kind of hold power over riders in terms of, if you want to ride for me, you have to ride for me in every spot. And if you're not riding for me here, then you don't ride for me. I think it's much more along those lines than it is him thinking, oh, Mucho Gusto is a better horse than Spun to Run and Tax. Honestly, he's probably thinking that they're all somewhere along, a similar level. Who knows? Maybe he had some knowledge as well that Spun to Run wasn't doing as well, and that's why he's come out of this race. Maybe they had a little bit of inside info on that. But I do think this is much more a move designed for Irad to kind of curry favor with Bob and potentially pick up, a Triple Crown horse for this year. I don't necessarily think this move is 100% about this race. Obviously, he hasn't been out in California working Mucho Gusto. It's not like he sat on Mucho Gusto in the morning and got some sort of feel that he didn't get from another horse. I think this was a little bit more politics than it was, individually deciding who to ride, who's my best chance in here. So I'm not really, if you like tax or if you previously liked spun to run, I wouldn't have been afraid of Irad coming off. And listen, you get a very capable replacement in his brother, Jose Ortiz. Tax is my main pick in here. Diamond Dupes is stretching out. And really, if you look at his dirt mile, he couldn't even contend with spun to run or Omaha Beach. I don't think he has much chance in here. Seeking the Soul, look, I love my man Dallas Stewart, but it feels like this horse has kind of maybe gone over the hill and kind of, lost his best form. His second half of 2019 was not that good. And really, I think this could have been a horse that maybe just peaked in this Stephen Foster right there. Look, Dallas will probably laugh in my face when he completes the exacta and it pays a fortune. But I am going to toss Seeking the Soul in this spot here. Omaha Beach, we talk a lot about, handicapping and trying to find value. And look, this horse could absolutely win this race. He's a very dangerous horse in this spot. That being said, he's got to go 2 turns with a lot of other speed in here. The only other times that he has won going, the 2-turn distances were at Oakland Park, leading into the Kentucky Derby, and that Arkansas Derby that was a very good run was also on and off track. I've heard whispers that he's got a little bit of a hot foot issue. I know he's been down at Gulfstream. He's had a couple breezes over the track there. He's a gorgeous horse. He's one of the most handsome horses you'll ever see. 100%, he can win. Do I want to bet him at 3-5 or 4-5? Absolutely not. I mean, his speed figures aren't even that much faster than some of his other, competitors in here. And then he's also got several speeds to his outside, and Mike Smith's going to have to figure out a way to either hold his spot or take some dirt and come out around them. 4-5, you can have him. And at times, I know you don't want to get beat by the favorite, but really to get paid in this game in spots like this, you just have to toss the favorite at times. It maybe in multis, okay, you can use him as a saver, as maybe as an A or a B, and you don't want to get, you don't want to maybe catch a price in a pick 5 and then lose when you don't have Omaha Beach. I've felt very foolish doing things like that in the past. A horse called Justify comes to mind. But for me, I think, as a gambler, you have to take a stand against Omaha Beach in here. And if he wins, stand up and applaud, and he'll head off to stud and absolutely a horse I'd love to breed to in the future. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about making money at the window. So I'm going to toss Omaha Beach. I'm gonna say he runs off the board, and I light up that tote board with Tax and a few others. One of those others that I'm going to use in here is Higher Power. He's going to be an A for me. He's a horse that I think that little cutback in distance, and then also coming from off the pace, is really going to help him. I think Flavian Pratt is outstanding at finding the right position, in these races, and typically shows up with big rides in these spots. And I think you're going to get 6-8 to 1 on Higher Power. He's a horse that I want to use in here for sure. He's going to be an A. War Story, look, he's an old war horse and a fun horse. To follow through his career, but he's never quite been much more than a grade 3 horse. And look, maybe he gets a small piece underneath. Maybe Joel just drops way out the back and comes running late. Who knows? Maybe in supers he's a C or an X, but I'm not really going to have any of him in the first or second slot in here. Mr. Freeze is one that I expect to kind of contest this early pace, and I'm hoping that he makes it, the meltdown that I envisioned that it could be. He's an X for me. Mucho Gusto is an interesting one. This is a horse I liked in the Travers quite a bit last year, and I thought he ran a really good race behind Maximum Security in the Haskell as well. Obviously, he had something where he had to kind of hit the bench for a little bit, but he has had a steady stream of works coming into this race, and they've really been pushing him in the morning to try and get him fit for this. Is he fit enough quite yet? I don't know, but he does have some outside positioning on Omaha Beach, and he's one that – it's hard to leave Bob off in a lot of these spots. He typically comes, to play and typically runs big. I would feel very, very foolish if this horse beat me. I'm probably going to have him as a B in here, and one that I expect, is going to be up on that pace. But, we also talk about when these pace, races with a lot of pace in them, somebody wins the war, right? So it's, okay, maybe it melts down, but there's somebody left standing, when you turn for home and a few of those other pressers fall off. maybe it's Mucho Gusto who wins the war. I could see it turning for home with, Omaha Beach and Mucho Gusto together as, maybe tax and higher power arranging up on them. Tenfold, I've been there too many times. I can't do it anymore. Big time divorce from Tenfold. I just don't think he's good enough. And then on the outside, you have Boat Express, who I think is just going to fuel this pace. And I really have always kind of questioned if he's quite good enough. I'm not going to have any of him in here. So really, when you go to play this race, I'm probably going to be playing tax, over some combination of higher power as well as Mucho Gusto. And then after that, I think you can probably get creative, in this C slot with any kind of prices that you might think have a chance of jumping up and hitting the board. I'm not going to talk you out of any big prices in here. Maybe if you want to play it safe, maybe you put Omaha Beach down here and play it that way. I might just swing for it and get Omaha Beach out of the number entirely. But in multis, I'm going to be all over tax. Definitely going to use some higher power in multis as well. Those would probably be my main two for pick fours or pick fives. But it should be an exciting Pegasus, and I hope everybody's kind of enjoyed watching me play around with my coloring book here. But, this is kind of how, some of your racing forms might end up looking at the end of the day. I know mine usually ends up looking like a big jumbled mess. And if we tuned in and you just saw this, you wouldn't understand it as much. But, as we talk through it, I think it's a little bit more interactive and exciting. Let us know who your picks are. We'll probably put this up on Chatter. And excited to, watch these good races this weekend. There's lots of other good racing at Gulfstream Park as well. Some races on the undercard that are very exciting. Hope everybody enjoyed this and is going to make some money at the window. Once again, I kind of like tax in the Pegasus World Cup. And then in the turf race, I kind of like a mix of Magic Wand, Mo Forza, and without Parole. So for Joe Migliore, we are going to sign off here, and everybody good luck this weekend with Pegasus.